Alright, welcome back to Dominion's 5 strategy, and today I'm going to be doing a request video, which is, someone just popped a request in the comments, and given that my one game at the moment, the Accidental Sentry game, is going relatively slowly, and I don't want to get too close up to the current turns, it's just got a slow turn timer as a result of some of the challenges people playing the game are facing. I thought, let's pick up another strategy video. They tend to get pretty high viewership anyway, and today we're going to talk about global enchantments. So I've jumped back into turn 60-something in my Orm game again, just to talk generally about what global enchantments are, and then we're going to jump out, go to the mod inspector, and we're going to talk about global enchantments by sort of category. So globals, as most people would know, are ritual spells that you can cast that propagate their effect turn after turn after turn. They're usually very, very powerful, and they take up a limited number of global enchantment spots. This is a setting which is decided at the beginning of the game, how many spots that you'll be sharing. And if a global enchantment is cast, or is attempted to be cast while these slots are full, it will attempt to displace one of the existing spells, at which point it becomes a contest between the paths of the mages involved relative to the cost of the spell, and the number of gems you overcast rituals by. Global enchantments are interesting because they have the overcast mechanic. What is the overcast mechanic? It means that every global enchantment has a certain number of gems it costs to cast, be it 60 or 80, but all you're really getting when you cast it for that minimum amount is like the bare absolute minimum of your spell. Like someone pokes that thing with a feather and the whole thing's going to come falling apart. Instead, you can reinforce your spell, make it so fortify it, defend it, make it stronger by adding additional gems. And that's invisible to anyone else in the game. They don't know how many gems you've overcast by. And whenever there's a contest between two global enchantments, which can happen a couple of ways, either someone can cast one when the list is full, and it will choose to face a random one on the list, I believe. You can cast the same global that's currently up, so if I was to attempt to cast Well of Misery this game, it would go into direct contrast with the existing Well of Misery, or someone can use the spell Dispel, which costs 30 gems and then an overcast, and it pits the overcast amount of Dispel versus the overcast amount of the global that's currently up. So there is a spell to take globals down. It's called Dispel. It is an Astral spell. It costs 30, so it's relatively dear, because you then need to guess the overcast amount, so it's actually more expensive than you'd think, because all your gems, if you fail to Dispel, are wasted, as when you try and cast a global with a full set and you fail to displace the one that you try and displace. So you're probably getting that global enchantments, especially in a contested environment, are very expensive to get up. And yet they're not all game winners. Far from it. Global enchantments range from the meh to the if this is not dispelled, you will probably win the game in the end. And I brought up this game to illustrate what a mid-late game list will look like. It's obviously very heavy on the competition, and 3 of these 5 are gem generator spells. One is a general buff spell that is nation unique, which is End of Culture, and then one is a generic nation buff spell, which is Gift of Health. Global enchantments fall into a number of categories, and I think the best way to talk about what they are now is to jump into some rips I took from the mod inspector and talk about them by category, because I think of global enchantments, if you're not going to view them one by one, it's easiest to think of them in terms of broad function. And I think of those functions as gem generators, national buffs, defensive globals, which are a very common category of global enchantment that are usually Dominion tied, and finally fuck the world spells, which ruin global ecology in the world and make life very, very terribly bad for everyone, usually except for the person casting them, because the person casting them is usually picking the one which picks on a requirement for life or a requirement for living that their nation doesn't have. So let's go have a look at those categories, and then depending on how we go for time, I may cut it and talk about the strategy behind globals in a second video, or I might do it in one. Let's see. Okay, category 1, gem generators. In case you're wondering why these spells are arrayed in a strange shape on the screen, I've roughly arrayed them from left to right in order of how terrified I will be if one goes up. So how significant a strategic threat I regard this spell going up as an opponent. important to stress here that this is opinion based, and secondly, there's a lot of ways you could order these spells. You could order them based on what is the best value to cast, based on the ratio between cost and what research level and how accessible you are. There's a lot of things you need to weigh when you're deciding whether to cast globals. But I figure most of the time you're going to be in a position of having globals cast against you rather than cast them if you're in a game with a large number of players and everyone's doing relatively well. So I've ordered them based on the scariness factor from left to right, with left being and right being this will win them the game if you don't stop them. So gem generators, what are they? Gem generators generate gems. You can think of gem generators as spells that just essentially generate an annuity that's paid monthly. You're investing a certain number of gems to get a guaranteed number of extra gems per month for as long as the spell goes up. So your gamble is how likely is someone else to try and knock my gem generator down in that time, thus leading to a negative payout. Now, you can reduce the probability someone will knock your gem generator down by putting more gems into it, but that extends the payoff time, which makes for a really interesting sort of decision-making process. You can gamble, for example. You can try and cast, for example, Mother Oak with 50 gems, just 50. Now, if anyone else tries to cast Mother Oak at all, yours will probably go down. If anyone tries to dispel it, it will probably go down. But if you do that, Mother Oak turns a profit in 6 turns, and that's a profit of 10 nature gems in 6 turns, which is a really quick payoff rate. And from every turn after that, it's gravy. Now, if you put 150 nature gems into Mother Oak, you can be reasonably confident that you are going to have Mother Oak for the rest of the game. Like, likely, unless someone else finds out that you overcast by 100 and decides to overcast by 110. And even then, they may not do it, just because that's really expensive. But your payoff time on that becomes 16 turns. Now, with some of these, like Mother Oak, that it can be cast early in the game, that may be good, that may be acceptable, a 16-turn payoff. But for others that tend to be cast later game, probably isn't. Nonetheless, gem-generating spells, because of how useful gems are probably, and because they're not aggressive and usually don't trigger an aggressive response, because they're just buffs, right? They're just buffs to your nation's incomes, don't tend to trigger the same aggressive responses that other spell types do, exception Arcane Nexus. So let's go through them. You'll notice that every field of magic every school has one gem generator spell, except for Astral, which has 2. Astral has the weakest and the strongest in the game. Stellar Focus is a cheap enchantment 7 Astral 5 spell that gives you 5 Astral Pearls per month. This makes it the weakest gem gen in terms of yield. What makes it interesting? Go away. What makes it interesting is the fact that 30 Astral Pearls is the same as the cost for Dispel, i.e. you need to spend as many pearls to dispel Stellar Focus as you did casting Stellar Focus, which means if you're trying to dispel Stellar Focus, you may as well just cast Stellar Focus yourself and try and steal it from that other person, because the result will be the same. This has the role usually of... It's not a huge impact, but there's a couple of interesting things you can do with it. The first is you can Stellar Focus bait, i.e. you can massively overcast it, expecting other people to come after it, because when people cast it, they tend to cast it low. In order to make it ever pay off, you can bait other people's Astral Pearls with it. If you want to dispel a global and you don't care which one it is, you can use it instead of a dispel, because of that interaction I discussed earlier. Or you can put it up if you just want a really non-threatening slight increase to your Astral Pearl income, knowing that most people won't bother going at it, especially if they're not Astral 5 access nations. If they are, they may try and overcast your Stellar Focus. But 5 gems per month, at least pearls are universal, but I would not panic. Like, this is the equivalent to people finding, a couple of nice sites, and you can't really control that, you wouldn't panic. Mother Oak is present in just about every game of Dominions I've ever been in. I think it is present, and it tends to be cast early, because uniquely among the gem generator spells, it comes at research level 5. It's an alt 5, nature 5 spell, which means if Pangea is in your game, if anyone is running a regen bless in your game, someone's going to have access to it, and it will usually go up early. It has, at minimum cast, a relatively short payoff period. It equalizes itself after 5 turns without an overcast, and as a result, I see it go up a lot. I wouldn't panic massively because it's only 10 gems per month rather than some of the larger numbers we'll get to see in a minute. But it's still significant. You should note who has Mother Oak up and mentally adjust their gem income accordingly. Is it worth dispelling? I think only if you're distinctly hostile to the person involved. Then you can do enough damage to them. But otherwise, that's why I place it here. Probably not. Blood Vortex is a step up. Blood Vortex generates a variable number of blood slaves based on the population of the area it's cast in. It can generate lots and lots of blood slaves. Why have I put it here? Because I figure that by the time someone is casting Blood Vortex, their blood economy is usually taking off hugely anyway. Blood Vortex is a bitch to dispel, because obviously all blood globals are a bitch to dispel because you can just rack up so many blood slaves. But because blood slaves are so common, a gem generator for even more blood slaves is, a bit meh intuitively to me. I also put it lower because you can't really panic about something that you can't knock down. It's hard to knock down Blood Vortex and keep it knocked down, so I don't know. Still, significant spell. Can generate quite a large number of blood slaves when you're lucky, and can generate not so many at all. Payoff period, as a result, is very variable, so I don't like it. I don't like gambling spells. Blood Vortex feels like a little bit of a gamble. Maybe if I can get into the formula behind it, I'll understand it a bit better, and I might change the rating to this tier here. And this tier is the Elemental and Well of Misery gem gen area, and it's interesting because the amount of gems tends to be relatively closely aligned at this point. There are slight differences in terms of value between the different ones of these spells, but I put them all in the same panic level tier. Let's go through them. Eternal Pyre. Advantages of Eternal Pyre comes earliest. Enchantment 6, fire 6 to cast, 20 fire gems per turn, 80 fire to cast. You'll notice Eternal Pyre, Maelstrom, and Well of Misery and Earthblood Deathwell, so 4 of the 5. Each one of these spells has like a trick to it that makes it different. Eternal Pyre is that it comes at an earlier research level, let down by and because it comes earlier, you're more likely to be able to make this payoff period. And the payoff period on this is only 4 turns to neutral, at a 0 overcast. You want to take this, you want to consider getting people together to take these sort of globals down, because they can really drive a gem economy quite significantly. Usually this will be paying for Lightless Lanterns, is my experience, but it could also pay for other things, evocations, summons, that kind of thing. Gaile Gate. So Gaile Gate, like most of these ones in the center, is a level 8 research. Its special is that it has a 20 gem discount over the usual gem gen range, so it's 60 rather than 80, which means it has a shorter payoff period. Also, it generates random hurricanes and storms across provinces not controlled by the caster, so it causes negative random events essentially in provinces that aren't controlled by the caster, and it gives you 20 air gems per turn. That's really good. Also 5 air rather than the 6s that you tend to see in these others, so all in all, this says it's cheaper and easier to cast. But getting access to Air 5 without having a god built for it anyway is already pretty difficult. So if they made this Air 6, they'd basically be putting it in the range of Elemental Queens, and that would be it. 20 air gems per turn, however, is good. Consider it. Maelstrom. Maelstrom's special is that it generates more gems than any of the gem gens in this category, for the usual 80 gem cost, evocation 8, and it may only be used underwater. So you get 15 water, 5 astral, 3 air, and 1 of every other gem type per month. So it's actually a very significant yield. Admittedly, water is not the most useful gem type, but hey, you're getting it. So that's Maelstrom. Good gem generator, underwater only, water 6. Water is an easy path to boost, but you have to go up evocation, and most nations won't go up evocation. Conjuration gives you Well of Misery. Well of Misery gives you 21 death gems per month, which is a really, really nifty trick. Like, really nifty. 21 death gems is really powerful. And it includes a sweetener. The sweetener is to discourage people from dispelling it, and that is that it increases everyone's worldwide income by 10%. Gold income. Because a lot of the shittiness in the world is being sucked into the Well of Misery, allowing everyone to get along with their lives and be more productive. That can discourage people from dispelling it. It shouldn't discourage people from dispelling it, because a 4-turn payoff period for death gems and then 20 extra death gems per turn is strong. But all of these are strong, but not so strong that people are usually going to martyr their pearl supplies to knock down your globals, and that's a nice little balance to have. You really want to get coalitions together if you want to knock down these globals, otherwise you just need to accept and let them be. Earthblood Deepwell. There's nothing really special about Earthblood Deepwell except that it sits in between Eternal Pyre and the others in terms of access. You get it at Enchantment 7, and you'll notice at this point that Enchantment gets you Eternal Pyre, Earthblood Deepwell, and Stellar Focus. So Enchantment has a handle on a lot of the gem gens. It also has Arcane Nexus, which we'll talk about in a minute. Earthblood Deepwell is the Orm spell. It is the Middle Age Orm spell. It gives you 20 Earth gems per turn. Other than that, there's nothing really special about it. If you can make really good use of Earth Gems and you can get E6, which some nations can get, Earthblood Deepwell is a really common one to see, especially if nations like Middle Age Orm are in the game. I think I've never seen a game where EA or MA Orm does not cast Earthblood Deepwell, but then again, I haven't played many games. Arcane Nexus is at a tier of its own. Arcane Nexus takes half of all the magic gems in the world that are used to cast, and then converts those as if they're being alchemized into astral pearls. So think about it this way: you get a quarter of all gems that are used in ritual magic or forging every turn, and you get those as astral pearls. So if someone cast Well of Misery with 200 death gems, for example, 50 Astral Pearls would just appear in your inventory if you had Arcane Nexus up. Now, there are exceptions. You don't convert Blood Slaves, and you don't convert Astral Pearls. Both of those are regarded as too pure, in inverted commas, to convert into Astral Pearls. But this can still mean that on the average turn, you're capturing effectively 25% of everyone else's gem income and recycling 25% of your own. And in a game of 8 players, this can easily say, forget 20 gems per turn, this can be generating 200 pearls per turn. And considering it only costs 150 put up, if you invest up front and overcast this long enough to get it up, it will quite rapidly allow you to build up an astral bank, which can protect future casts of Arcane Nexus, because it'll pay for itself in one turn. Two turns. In extremis, if you just bank 2 or 3 turns of income from Arcane Nexus and then keep that as your permanent bank, no one will ever take it down permanently. And that's terrifying. In my early age Orm game, Therados got this up and was routinely generating 150 Astral Pearls per turn. And at this point, if you can't take it down probably turn 1, max turn 2 that it's up, and if you're going to take it down turn 2, make sure you coordinate with all the other people in the game. Do not spend gems this turn. Don't stop your forging, stop your rituals, just hold for a turn, and then we'll dispel their shit. Then you're in a position where you're going to lose the long-term economic game, because the other person is just going to have too many gems, and if they've got Astral 8 to cast this thing, they're within a hair's breadth of going to Astral 9, even if they have to empower to get there, and at Astral 9 they can wish, and they can turn Arcane Nexus into wished for gems, and those wished for gems can do a whole bunch of ritual casting and forging, which rotate back through Arcane Nexus, and you quite rapidly get a feedback loop, which resulted in, I believe, a player who had Arcane Nexus up once told me that they were running a gem income effectively of 400 gems per turn, using Arcane Nexus and Wish in combination with each other. That's terrifying. Take Arcane Nexus down if you see it. Forget about the rest of these. This is target priority number 1 and quite possibly the most powerful global in the game. We'll talk about its competitor in a bit. So that's gem generators. They're very common. They boost your economy in a very known way. Their threat level varies. Only Arcane Nexus is a game ender, but be wary of these ones as well. Let's go on to the next category. Okay, so sometimes you want to boost your economy, but you're not obsessed with gems. And there are other spells in this game, and I've got some examples here, that help you boost your economy or the way your nation performs without being focused on gem generation. So I've laid them out here. They're a mixture of weird, wonderful, and boring, with varying levels of power. Let's start with interesting, but mostly useless. Thetis Blessing. So this allows troops that can't normally go underwater to enter underwater as if they are water breathing. They are poor amphibians, so you suffer all the poor amphibian penalties, halving your combat speed and losing 3 defense and adding an encumbrance point. But you think, oh wow, this does allow me to invade the ocean. It comes in enchantment 7, so a little late. Only costs 50 water gems and 5 water, both of which, if you have any water, are relatively easy to get to. You can boost from water 2 to water 4 like really easily, and then use conjuration to get your way to 5. Problem. If this is dispelled while troops are underwater, they all die. So if you plan to invade the water nations using this spell, you need to overcast it up the absolute wazoo, to the point where I wouldn't regard it as worth it, lest those underwater nations, particularly if those underwater nations happen to be, I don't know, Relay, Pelagia, those are both astral nations. Arithia, if they're hiding underwater. Anyone who can do pearl farming. Pearl farming allows you to convert water gems into astral pearls for dispels. Relay naturally has massive astral income, and high astral mages who can cast dispel with the bonus. This is usually just begging for your entire army to drown. Imagine everyone goes underwater scuba tanks, and then suddenly all those tanks are empty. It would be a really ugly, terrible way to die. And it happens to your entire army if you stuff up with Thetis Blessing. So I put it down here on the not so scary, because you're actually going to be spending every turn worrying that you're going to have one line on your turn summary saying your global enchantment has been dispelled successfully, and all your troops are dead. Bang. Let's talk about not so, then one step up from this, which I think causes PTSD in the person casting it, to slightly useful national spells, Giganto Macchia and End of Culture. So End of Culture, Yomi, just increases the spawn rate of Oni. So it's EA Yomi unique, it comes relatively early, and it just increases the amount of Oni that spawn. Now that's a good thing, but to be honest, I think if you're fighting Yomi, you shouldn't be panicking, because if your counter works against 100 or 200 chaff demons, it's going to work against 400 chaff demons. And if it doesn't work against 200 chaff demons, then 400 chaff demons aren't going to make your situation much worse. So I wouldn't panic too much if End of Culture goes up as Yomi. Now, as Yomi, I'd cast it. It blocks a global slot, and it lets you build more armies of chaff for siege purposes and fighting on more fronts. But I wouldn't really panic if I'm an enemy of Yomi and this goes up. Giganto Macchia is similar. Giganto Macchia is common to all ages of the Maconi Phlegra line. However, it has slightly different benefits in each of them. You get the access to additional Giganti troops as EA Maconi, but it comes too late. At Thaumaturgy 7, by the time you get there, you're not really fighting troop-based wars anymore. In fact, I'm not sure you're alive if you're EA Maconi. It gives your Dominion a conflict bonus as well, which helps you Dom push. But neither of those are really enough to swing the tide of battle. The one thing I'll say is the Dominion conflict bonus could be useful when combined with a defensive global, but it's a lot of gems. But when we talk about defensive globals, you'll see what I mean. In LA Phlegra, it allows you to recruit Laestrygonian troops, which is interesting. I've never seen it done, but it could be interesting. I don't think they occupy enough squares for their cost, but they're bloody tough, so could be worth investigating. Nonetheless, put these in the column. If you're someone else, you're like, oh, cute, Maconi has Giganto Macchia. I'm kind of happy they have that. At least it means that they're alive. And I can kill them later because they're not particularly threatening. Riches from Beneath. Now we're getting into something that's actually decent. Riches from Beneath is a resource bonus, for the most part, with a limited province income boost. So what you get is up to 100% resource boost, and you get that at 5 Dominion candles. So you're up to doubling the resources in your provinces. And then you get an increase of up to 20% income, which is actually quite strong in 5 Dominion candles. And then this income from mines bonus usually doesn't amount to much. This is a good general purpose economy buff. If you are Middle Age Ulm if you are Late Age Atlantis, if you're anyone else who has really resource intensive gold cheap troops that you really want to put out in large numbers, Riches from Beneath can help solve that problem. Good spell. Good spell. Now you're relying on having your Dominion value out like you would with the defense spell, but no, it's good. I've put it here in non-threatening because unless you're directly fighting that nation, it's not a huge problem. And if they produce more and more troops, well, like the counter that works to some of those troops should work to a lot more of those troops, but there's a reason they want more of their troops. So the jump, let me just say, the jump from this category to this category is huge, and then these are all sort of bundled in together, these two, to a limited extent. Let's talk one tier up. Eyes of God. I've put Eyes of God here, but I put a special spell up here as sort of an asterisk on this. Eyes of God comes early, enchantment 5. It's relatively cheap at 50 Astral Pearls, and it gives you global vision. Global vision, no illusions and phantasms. You can see Dominion borders, you can see magic sites, you patrol more effectively, you can see all the graphs in the Nation info tab. This is really, really good. I think information is absolutely king in warfare, and this allows you to selectively release information. It allows you to turn the tide of conflicts. It allows you to know where to target for magic sites. It allows you to know roughly what people's incomes are. See armies, patrol out scouts. You'll never be infiltrated. You're very unlikely to be elfed. The list of things that make this spell generally amazing go on and on and on, and then you remember this spell up here exists. No matter how much you overcast Eyes of God, if someone for 75 gems casts Fate of Oedipus, it's only Fire 4, Evo 4. Someone in your game will have this for 75 fire gems, which are not generally considered particularly valuable. So Eyes of God goes down and the Mage is blinded. It's the only global that has a special built-in unblockable counter. And that stops Eyes of God being God tier. Because otherwise I would think everyone would be competing over Eyes of God because it is amazing. It changes the way you play the game. It changes the way you can play others in the game. You'll never be outmaneuvered again. The list of good things go on. It's a good spell. It's a good spell, and this makes it very hard to use effectively. Let's talk about Celestial Rainbow. Celestial Rainbow you'll almost never see in a game because it comes at Evocation 9, and who on God's green earth researches Evocation 9 and then has Worst 7, Nature 5, Pathing available, and 80 spare water gems? That said, I'm rating them based on how much you should panic if they go up, and maybe Celestial Rainbow is partly here because it shows you that your opponent has Evo 9, Water 7, Nature 5, which is impressive pathing. What is that, a Naiad with a All Paths boost and other boosters to get the pass? Yeah, you could get there. So, what does this do? It generates a small amount of gold, but the gold's not the point. The luck scale is a great income scale, which you'll get, and it increases the luck scale in your provinces by 2. Now, if you already have 1 luck, this takes you to 3 luck, and that's what you really, really want. Then it also adds, and this is why I think it's really important, really amazing as a late game spell. It adds a small level of dome protection. That is a block chance on ritual magic to all of your provinces based on the luck scale. I believe it caps at 30% at positive 3 luck. I think misfortune counts as negative, not positive in this sense. That means that every ritual spell targeting your territory has a 30% chance to fail. Normally you have to cast limited time domes over your lab provinces, and there's no way to protect non-lab provinces. This is important because it helps mess up teleport attacks. If they rely on teleporting in multiple units, some of them might not appear, so they need redundancy. Some gems they waste on ritual attack spells like Flames from the Sky can be wasted. This gives you tremendous freedom of movement in your own territory, and you can still put up regular domes over your important provinces and double up that protection, which is great. I think Celestial Rainbow, I've never seen it, but this as a defensive ability is really significant. Forge of the Ancients is also really significant, and can allow nations to go into absolute overdrive on forging. What it does is it gives all of their units a 20% discount on forging. Not the 2 gems off, a 20%. Now, that means it's only 1 gem discount on 5 gem items, but it scales accordingly, and it can, if you're forging lots of more expensive items, like if you're routinely forging Scutata Volturni, for like massing thugs every turn. If your thug kit is running into 60 or 80 gems per turn as you outfit immortals, for example, this can rapidly compound into significant savings, and it gives everyone Master Smith +1, which is essentially it empowers everyone by 1 in everything for the purpose of forging. This can give you access to a lot more, it means you need fewer boosters. This can be a tremendous gem economy boost, and it's sufficiently non-threatening that I feel the need to call out for the fact that it can be bloody threatening. If you let the wrong people get a hold of this, it can give them access to key breakpoints, and they can make this 80 gems back relatively quickly if they're forging a lot. If you're forging 80 gems per turn, this has got a payback period of 5 turns, not even counting for the Master Smith ability. So this compounds later in the game, whereas gens remain static, with the exception of Arcane Nexus. This scales into the late game, which is why I think it's scarier than something that just gives a flat income. Early in the game, not too scary. Let's talk about the 2 kings. And they're kings for different reasons. Enchant 7 and Enchant 9 gives you Gift of Health and Gift of Nature's Bounty. Gift of Health. Gift of Health gives you, for every Dominion candle you have, an HP boost and a chance of healing afflictions. And it's 10% chance of healing and a plus 10% HP boost per candle in your Dominion, which means that at 10 Dominion candles you are at a 100% HP boost, which doubles the survivability of your army, and you'll be healing lots of afflictions and diseases. This spell, 1, buffs up your army on the home front quite significantly. Secondly, it reduces aging by half, so it's a partial counter to spells that will be accelerating aging, but it's only 1, Burden of Time. It partly counters things that will be giving you diseases like foul air. And this healing affliction thing is most significant, not most significant, but famously significant in that it combos with Tartarian Gate, which summons Titans, which usually have feeble-minded and a whole bunch of afflictions. You can't normally heal those sort of afflictions practically or easily, and the whole point of Tartarian Gate is you can produce lots and lots and lots of these Titans, so you can't really be using super expensive items to be buffing and boosting them all up. Gifted Health is an industrial way of healing them up. It'll also help, for example, Mind Hunters that have become feeble-minded slowly recover. Feeble-minded is a bit hard to heal, but it does heal. And I have fought a Therados that uses Gift of Health and Tartarian Gate in combination, and it is freaking terrifying over time, because if you can't bring it down, if you can't stop it, they just build up more and more and more quite capable super combatants, and you know they're doing it on the cheap, and it's frustrating as hell. Gift of Health is powerful. Gift of Nature's Bounty, I've seen it cast never in a multiplayer game. I've cast it in single player, because you can cast whatever you want in single player. 20% income per Dominion candle. So yes, that's it can triple your income at 10 Dominion candles. If you are still using gold, if the economy has not transitioned purely to gem-based or blood-based or whatever at that point in the game, Gift of Nature's Bounty can be really good. Hypothetically, trebling the size of your economy is incredible. I would regard it as threatening if I'm fighting someone who's still using gold. This means if someone has good recruit anywhere mages that are relatively expensive, Gift of Nature's Bounty is going to make them markedly more dangerous. If you are fighting Nazca, if Nazca ever got this up, it would be incredible, because they can hire Royal Monkeys every turn, they can pump out Huron Priests from all their forts, they can help overcome their trash scales. This can be really, really, really good. Of course, if someone isn't really have anything to do with their gold, like their late game, early age Ulm, for example, maybe they just build 15 temple fort complexes and start dom pushing everyone in the game. I don't know. It's powerful. In general, you would see these spells less than you would see gem gens, because most people, you'll always get a return off gems. These tend to be softer, harder to get to. Like, there's a lot of reasons you see them less. However, they're still significant. That's all the feel-good spells. Let's start talking about the slightly less feel-good spells. Alright, let's say you're sick of making your economy better, you're sick of getting gem income, or maybe you've put them up. Maybe you have put up your gem generators, and as a result, people are like, mate, we need to go kill that guy. He's getting discounts on his forging and 20 earth gems per turn. We really need to put him down before he becomes a serious problem for everybody. And you're like, well, now I need to use my massive gem income in order to defend myself from these attackers that have come to tear down my globals. That's when you turn to defensive globals, and I've got a list of them in front of us now. Defensive globals are those that usually operate only within your dominion, with limited exceptions, and help you defend your territory against aggressors, either by attacking enemy commanders, by destroying their armies, by denying them intelligence, or just by making it easier for you to win fights. So let's go through them, starting from shit tier and working their way up. Haunted Forest probably shouldn't be shit tier, but I don't like it. It basically reanimates enemies that die in your dominion as mannequins who fight for a while before they dissolve. It's a minor battlefield buff that you can put up for 60 nature gems at enchantment 8. I wouldn't be particularly threatened by it unless you think that you're going to be taking casualties and the mannequins are going to disrupt your formations. Other than that, yeah. Mechanical Militia is one of 2 militia spells. It's the militia are okay. You get a mixture of mechanical men, 1 per province defense, and then you also get at higher PD levels you get Iron Flies, which are mechanical, relatively high prot flying units. This buffs your PD. Is buffing PD useful? Yeah, but I'm not sure it's 80 Earth Gems useful. It will stiffen your PD significantly, which makes things like having a single Wind of Death caster or an area wipe caster behind PD more practical, because the PD is more likely to hold, and mechanical units are invulnerable to a lot of battlefield wiping sort of spells that you might be doing. But at Construction 9, 80 Earth Gems, I wouldn't be super threatened, because if they've got Construction 9, you've probably got spells that can deal with Mechanical Militia at a PD front, but, helpful. Fata Morgana, named after the famous Mirage, type of Mirage, is another PD spell, but it's better than Mechanical Militia in my view, because it comes with some extra useful additions. It scrambles, how do I put this? It scrambles enemy intelligence significantly. I believe since the latest patch, it actually hides, within your dominion, it hides which nation even owns the province, which forces, if people are coalitioning you, forces a lot better coordination between them. It scrambles scout reports on your armies, diminishing the quality of their intelligence. It adds Phantasmal Warriors and Phantasmal Archers, and at higher levels Phantasmal Knights to your province defense, which introduces ethereal chaffing units to your defense, so you better hope the enemy better hope they brought counters to those, and it gives you minus unrest per turn. And this unrest in particular, this minus unrest per turn, is actually a significant economic benefit, particularly if you're conquering territory that is under your dominion, but hasn't been under your control, and as a result the unrest is going to be high. If you're blood hunting, this can save a lot of your population by offsetting some of the need to patrol. If you disperse your blood hunters more than you normally would, the unrest will just passively bleed down instead, and that's significant. Okay, sorry for the cut there. Moving right along, we have a very situational spell, one that may or may not belong in this spot on the list depending on who you're playing and who you're playing against. If you are not an undead nation, this is much less threatening even than Mechanical Militia. And if you are playing an undead nation, it belongs up here with Wrath of God. Whoops, there we are. What is Purgatory? What does it do? Purgatory turns your dominion into a death trap for undead beings, because when they walk around every month, there is a chance they will simply catch fire. They have a 10% chance per dominion candle in your dominion to take 18 armor-piercing fire damage per turn. Now, that's not enough to reliably kill armoured or Foggy Undead. It's not enough to kill high HP commanders of the type that Ermor has, although it can if it's really lucky with its rolls. Those units tend to be saved by very high protection and or very high hit point levels. What it can't do is save the hordes and hordes and hordes of chaff that those armies rely on in order to maintain their strength. So Long Dead, for example, vary from having no protection to quite decent protection. In the case of, say, Ormish National Long Dead, this still annihilates them. At least reliably over time, and if they're not armoured at all, it annihilates them reliably almost instantly. They evaporate on contact with your Dominion. Long Dead Horsemen are vulnerable to this. Knights the Unholy Sepulchre can still be taken down by this. And what a spell that zaps so reliably. I mean, let's just say you're running 5 or 6 candles. You'll be zapping up to 50% of the enemy chaff from the first turn they enter your territory. What this does is quite quickly ablate out the undead chaff that undead nations often use as their siege chaff. Lictors, you're not going to have enough lictors to crack fort walls. You're not going to have enough Lemurian ghosts to crack fort walls. Sorry, you're not going to have Lima Consuls to take down walls. You're going to rely on the ghosts instead. And something like Purgatory can really punish large stacks of undead in that way. So don't worry about it if you're not undead. If you are undead, taking it down probably is a prerequisite to efficiently sieging and destroying someone's nation. Moving on, let's talk about the defensive assassination spell tier that happens here. Sorry, whenever I move my mouse, there's a danger of rolling the mouse wheel, and I have all these in a folder. Lure of the Deep, Looming Hell, Strands of Arcane Power. All of these have flaws which put them below the two that we're going to talk about in the tier above. Strands of Arcane Power. Strands of Arcane Power, it can only be used by a high-level Astral caster, and it has a couple of benefits. The first is the assassination/mind burn effect. So what this does is it searches your territory, and every turn there's a chance that if there's within your dominion, if there are enemy astral mages, that you'll get into basically what is essentially a magic duel with them. But it inflicts feeble mind, not lethal as far as I know. Non-astral mages non-astral enemy mages get mind burned, which may or may not be, destructive. 10 armor negating damage with an MR negates check against your penetration is significant. Significant, but herein lies the problem. You're going to be using very high level Astral caster, and you can't control how many enemy units they bring in with high Astral to try and take you on. So if you're using this usually with your god or someone like that, if the enemy chooses to bring in some very high-level Astral mages, they can feeble-mind your god. If they're willing to sacrifice enough mages to roll a dice enough times, you'll always be risking your god doing this. Now, the countervailing benefit is that you're also performing, and I don't understand the mechanics entirely behind this, you're performing site searches throughout your territory magically every turn, as if you were remote searching in some way. In testing, this seems to find a reasonable number of sites every turn or two, so it's good in that sense, but I'm worried about the danger to your god, essentially. I'm worried about the danger of someone saying, oh, well, they cast it, they were probably boosted to Astral 7, so you're probably base Astral 5, the enemy rolls in a couple of base Astral 4s, you're going to be feeble-minded. They might feeble-mind a few of theirs, but your god, and when that happens, the spell drops. So you're wasting 70 pearls and the mind of your god, which makes it very worth the enemy throwing some decent Astral mages at you if they have them. Looming Hell basically tempts troops to try and assassinate their own commanders. The morale save is to avoid this, and you can only have up to 5 units tempted at a time, is 10 plus Dominion versus their morale. 4 easier to pass, strangely enough, if the commander has fear. I like that. They're so scared of their commander that the devils can't tempt them to assassinate him in order to seal the bargain. So this can go pretty high. So it'll be a test versus 15, for example. But it's not going to hit enough units enough of the time, and then not enough of the time will they succeed in their assassination for me to regard this as truly top tier. But it's blood. so you can cast it. In practice, in other people's games, they've reported it doesn't seem particularly effective. I vouch for the fact I have limited experience here and won't speak for or against it. This is just my impression. Lure of the Deep is a little easier to understand mechanically. If you are by the water and if your Dominion is in place, enemy units in that area have a 20% plus Dominion times 20% chance of being lured. At that point, you have an easy magic resistance check to pass. So most people who are hit, most commanders that are hit by this will not fail the check. However, if you fail, you drown. So if you can't breathe underwater, you drown. There's a minor secondary benefit in that if you're Oceania, this also discounts your sirens, but that's neither here nor there really. What this is really about is about turning coastal zones into kill zones for enemy commanders, and the most vulnerable will be low leadership commanders that you truck around in very large numbers. So for example, if you're fighting one of the monkey nations and they're carrying around lots and lots and lots and lots of Yogi. Yogi have, I think, 7 leadership, 7 leadership makes them vulnerable to Looming Hell, not to Lure of the Deep. I'd have to check what their magic resistance on them are. Maybe because they're animals, they'll be fairly low. Either way, if you have medium to low magic resistance commanders that have to come in large numbers to support enemy armies, which is why I instantly thought of Communion Mages, because they tend to come around in very large numbers, you may see significant numbers of them drown if they're by the sea and your Dominion is in play. If the enemy brings his Dominion forward, like most defensive spells, it barely works. These 3 spells are moderately significant deterrents, but all of them have their own weaknesses, which is why they belong in this middle tier. Wrath of God and Vengeful Water do not have those weaknesses and thus belong in their own tiers. They're really good, but in different ways, and I decided rather than trying to separate them, let's talk about them together. Vengeful Water is another assassination spell. It affects enemy commanders in your Dominion, and it is strongest in the water, and then it gets progressively weaker depending on the province. And what that means is, there is a chance for every enemy commander in your Dominion to be attacked by a water elemental in an assassination battle every turn. That chance per commander is 5% plus 2 times your Dominion. So I believe this caps out at 25% of all enemy commanders in your Dominion will be attacked by a water elemental. Where the water comes into play is the size of that water elemental, varying from it's either size 6s or size 5s in water and coastal provinces. Then you get I think it's 3s or 4s in provinces with rivers, down to size 2s or 3s when you're dealing with provinces that have no access to the water at all. A size 2 or 3 water elemental will not reliably assassinate most mages. A size 5 or 6 water elemental will mess people up. Even in Cold 3, where they turn into ice elementals, if they are not sufficiently large, an ice elemental at size 5 or 6 will trample the crap out of most enemies that it could be attacking. Now, big enemy thugs and whatnot probably can kill water elementals, but again, if you're trucking around a lot of commanders and a lot of supporting units in order to make your army work, if you're trucking around mage support and commanders and your troops from different places, this can lead to commanders dying, armies getting strung out, troops being immobile, messing up scripting. This can really, really mess people up, and if you are a water nation defending a coastal empire, this is a dream, because they come onto your forts, they come under the effect of this, and it's like throwing assassins at a quarter of them every turn, only all of your assassins have water bottles, and then I guess the assassin isn't actually there, it's just a water bottle. But it's still brutal. Brutal defensive spell that makes it less appealing for people to attack into you, and they'll probably want to knock it down if they can't avoid your coastal areas. Non-coastal areas, maybe they just suck up fighting the size 2 or 3 water elementals, but they may find that their weaker mages, their human mages, are vulnerable depending on what path and gear they have. Wrath of God is interesting because it's actually lower level than almost all of these. It's Evocation 6, it's Astral Air Cross Path. And what this does is strikes every province on the planet. Well, it has a chance to strike units at every province on the planet, including those where you do not have Dominion. The hit chance per month is written here. 2% to hit any given unit or commander, plus 2% times your Dominion in the province, so up to 20% here, plus the turmoil scale, and always minimum 1% chance. So there is always a 1% chance that people going about their business are going to be hit by a lightning bolt on an even turn. And then the damage is 9 armor negating shock. If they are not shock resistant and they are human HP, then this has a slightly below even chance of killing them. So if your opponents are a human HP nation, you might kill, 1% of their human units per turn. And that doesn't seem particularly impressive, but when they come into your territory, that percentage may increase up and up and up. Sorry, half a percentage of their human units, or a little bit less. That'll increase to maybe you're killing 10% of the attackers per turn, 5 to 10% of the attackers per turn, depending on if you have turmoil scales or not and what sort of HP they're bringing. If they're bringing subhuman HP units, then the situation gets even worse. This can be effective, for example, against undead swarms, just like Purgatory can, because 9 armor negating and 18 fire in the same sort of, so far as scary things that you don't deal with go. So, Wrath of God, I've seen it cast. The casualty counts, I've cast it myself. In the last turns of the Nazca game, the casualty counts from it were about 100 to 150 units per turn that it was killing, of everyone's on the maps, other than my own. So you can't focus it or control it, and it does piss people off. Like, it scares people because it has an effect outside of your dominion. As a result, it's special, it needs to be feared, and it may result in a diplomatic incident. Dark Skies, I've put up here. Dark Skies isn't like other defense spells. It doesn't operate by killing units. It doesn't operate by buffing your PD. It doesn't operate by assassinating commanders. There's no direct element here. You don't see a direct impact on the battlefield. Instead, what Dark Skies does is for every point of dominion you have in a province, when you have Dark Skies up, enemy morale in any battles occurring in that province falls by 1. There's also slight darkness. You can see immediately, when average morale is like 10 to 12, that this can be extremely significant. If you have 10 Dominion candles in a province, you drop an average unit down to morale of 2, which means anything prompting it to have a morale check will cause it to run. If you combine this with Rain of Blood, you can get reliably, because you'll have 5 Dominion candles, reliably get that 10 morale negation. And then all it takes is something to cause the enemy to take a check. This, in niche circumstances, could even be used to counter, say, if you were being raided by least Dragonian tyrants, and you had available to you Rain of Blood, Wailing Winds, and Dark Skies was up, you could reliably spawn onto the field, and then before you berserk your enemy, throw up your globals, make them flee, and if you've repeated the process on the provinces they could flee to, you'll kill them on retreat. This can make a mockery out of armies for whom morale is relevant, and morale is relevant for a lot of units. So it won't stop you, like most of these, it won't stop you being raided by thugs, it won't stop you being raided by super combatants, but it will prevent the enemy winning pitched battles in your territory with armies, and it comes at Thaumaturgy 7. It is an eminently castable spell, and it should be considered for defensive purposes. However, I think it is bait for a dispel because it is so good. I think if someone's going to attack you, they'll dispel it first. But hey, impressive spell. Final category to graduate into are the spells that screw up the world. These are spells that nobody likes, no one will appreciate you, everyone will hate you, and you cast because you want to ruin life for people in a very particular way. Before the Pantocrator disappeared and was presumably controlling and restricting the use of magic, everything was as we know from the lore. But as the Ascension Wars progress, and magic is re-researched and accessed and deployed, magic becomes much more akin to weapons of mass destruction. You see this evolution in Dominions games. In Year 0, it's very much conventional armies are fighting each other. In Year 1 to 3, people start using evocations and buffing magic. And by the time you get to the end, they're summoning demigods, they're making the sky rain with blood, and people are starting to devastate entire provinces and slaughter their populations with remote attack spells. And these globals are sort of the culmination of that, sort of stuff up the world, spite everyone so that I can take up godhood kind of spells. All of these are diplomatic incidents waiting to happen, but hey, Let's talk through them. The bottom ones are ones where I think most people would generally ignore them if they went up. Wild Hunt and Kindly Ones are both different spells that create NPC thugs that randomly attack individuals meeting certain criterion. Wild Hunt targets enemy priests in forest provinces. One's led by a Lord of the Hunt. This is kind of shitty. One, the hunts aren't particularly strong, and secondly, if anyone attacks and is attacked by and then kills the Lord of the Hunt, the spell goes down. Like, okay. I've seen it used once by Pangaea, accomplished not much other than killing a few of my shamans when I was playing EA Orm. Kindly Ones. Kindly Ones creates a few more assassins. I think one attacks blood mages, one attacks people with high kill counts, and the third is just completely random, just attacks random commanders. They're not super powerful. There's only 3 of them, so there can only be 3 attacks over the entire world, so most people won't get attacked at any given turn unless it's a very small game. And it comes at Conjuration 8, which means you'll seldom see it. There'll be too much competition for global spots, so most people just ignore these if they come up. Enchanted Forests. Enchanted Forest is not really the world spell, and most people won't mind too much, but it will it'll mess people up a little bit, and as a result, people will probably want to bring it down in certain cases, and it really depends on how much forest is on the map for how significant this is. What it does is it turns all forests you don't control into your temples, so they start generating candle checks. Once you've achieved positive dominion in those provinces, anything that is in that province or neighbours that province that belongs to your enemy may be attacked by like random forest creatures. Again, these random forest creatures will not kill anything significant, but they might kill lab rats, they might kill ordinary commanders and scouts and generally be a nuisance. If you get higher dominion and high growth, it can lead to more powerful attacks, but you won't get high dominion in forests that are surrounded by your enemy because it stops counting as a temple once you reach high dominion, and the enemy will presumably be dom pushing it with their own natural temples and whatnot. So, Enchanted Forest can also be countered if the enemy just keeps 1 or 2 priests in all their forest provinces and holding back those temple checks and prevents you getting positive dominion. If they have heaps of dominion already, you will lose the conflict checks and not override their dominion. So again, it depends how many forests there are and how proactive people are in terms of taking countermeasures. Not sure it's worth 90 nature gems. 2 water ones now at Alt 7 and Enchantment 8, Sea of Ice and Wrath of the Sea. Sea of Ice is interesting. Sea of Ice takes the entire surface of the ocean and freezes it. Just freezes it solid. Why is this significant? It means you can't normally now walk from on top of the ice to underneath the ice. You can't go from land to water or vice versa. Ocean units can use this to seal themselves in if they're on the defense, or this is why it's in the Screw the World sort of setting. Land nations can use it to lock the water nations in, so they're trapped in the water and can't contest anything. It also disables sailing. So if there are sailing nations in the game, this really is spiting them by that operation. Now, it doesn't prevent teleportation. So if you're trying to freeze in, say, middle-aged Relay, you better be sure they don't have labs on land that they can just gateway up out of. And if you are Relay, you may consider putting this up if you're just going to be gatewaying all your armies out anyway. But it's an interesting meta choice. You can see these are all still pretty subtle at this point. Wrath of the Sea is less subtle, but also it reduces income in all coastal provinces by 30%. That's it. Just a straight 30% nerf to coastal income. Usually, the people with high water magic tend to be water nations. Water nations have a large number of coastal provinces because all of the provinces of land abutting their home territory will de facto be coastal. So it's rare that someone will want to cast this. And if it goes up, most people will usually just grin and bear it because the person who's casting it is probably suffering as well, except under niche circumstances. Let's get a little bit worse now. Perpetual Storm. Negative 20% on all overwater provinces' income. Ouch. Just ouch. Map movement costs are increased by 2. And remember, you work in half steps, so that's quite a significant decrease in speed. Most armies are going to be moving at 1 province per turn at that point. Fire attack spells such as Fire from Afar have a 25% chance of missing their target. Seeking Arrow has a 75% chance of missing their target. Those are all like somewhat significant. Also, storms in every battle. So the reason this would usually want to be put up is if someone is an air nation who wants to start with storms up in every battle so they can immediately go summon storm power and into evocations or air elementals. The problem is a lot of the strong air nations are birds, and perpetual storms makes it impossible to fly. So if you are a non-flying nation and you want to screw the birds over, or at very least limit them to their storm flying units and commanders, of which not all bird nations have a bunch, Nazca, for example, has storm-flying units, but not storm-flying commanders. Perpetual Storm can be a double-edged sword against them to consider. Second Sun and Illwinter belong together. Second Sun is probably slightly less dangerous. Second Sun creates a Second Sun. Huge ball of fire in the sky. So, the world will go hot steadily over time. Heat scales right up to the point where if you're fighting LA Atlantis, they'll consider this an act of war because their forts will start to melt. Same for Calum. Their forts will start to melt, their administration will break down, life will be terrible for them. So everyone will slowly go heat. It also increases death scales because you're an arsehole if you cast this spell. Slowly increases those death scales, but this will start to grind down everyone's growth scales, and you might start to put people into death, which means really you're costing a lot of people their lives in doing this. Illwinter goes the other way. Illwinter is a unique spell, unlike Second Sun, and it belongs to Niflheim, Jotunheim, and Utgard. So, this snaps the world to cold 3. It says and the patch notes say it grinds the cold scale down, but in my experience, I think it still sets the province to cold 3. Every province in the world has a 50% chance to gain D4 unrest per turn, and all cold provinces may be subject to random attacks by Nifl giants and Jotun wolves, which are quite significantly powerful indies and will usually overcome patrollers, particularly if it's Nifl giants and the province is cold 3 because Illwinter is up, in which case they have a really brutal chill aura and like 26 protection, not what your average PD can deal with. So, Illwinter can be brutal. Illwinter gives freedom of operation to the cold-loving giants and screws everyone else. That said, if you are Late Age Atlantis and your Utgardish ally casts this, then you'll be very happy, not talking about any game in particular. Foul Air. Foul Air is the first of the Death Screw the World spells, and Death screws the world better than any other field except for Blood. Foul Air's tip says it only increases unrest by plus D4, which is just twice the unrest effect of Illwinter. That's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is everyone who is wounded will instantly get a disease. Every living unit that is wounded will instantly get a disease. So, if what's a nice example of this? There's a blood spell that causes 1 damage to everyone on the field. 1 armor negating damage to everyone on the field plus DRN. Anyway, if you have a way to chip damage huge slew, like sections of an enemy army, if you have the ability to earthquake or damage troops in a way that won't kill them but will inflict a little bit of damage, they'll get diseases. And diseases are terrible. Diseases are hard to cure en masse for most nations. They're possible to cure in small numbers but very difficult to cure en masse. They steadily give afflictions, they cut HP down by 10% per turn, and after 10 turns they kill you. So if you want to play a long game, this is dangerous. It means if people are fighting wars even not against you, you increase their casualty rates. And if you are a disease-immune nation, you love this. Foul Air's crap. This unrest also should not be underestimated. It mounts quickly and starts to really steadily erode the income from most provinces unless there are countervailing unrest mitigators. Burden of Time. What could be worse than Foul Air? Burden of Time could be worse than Foul Air. So, Burden of Time is the Middle-Age Ermor special. It's evil, and it comes at Thaumaturgy 5, and it requires only Death 5 to cast. The only reason Ermors don't cast it is because it acts too slowly to save them from the inevitable rush of everyone coming to kill them. And the temptation is always to use the Death Gems for more troops or Sacreds instead. So, what does Burden of Time do? Burden of Time inflicts upon everyone the suffering that comes from aging really, really quickly. And this has a couple of effects that make sense. The first is worldwide population loss of about 2% per turn. So it'll kill the population of the world, but slowly. It's equivalent to putting, I think, Death 3 scales It's worse than putting death rescales in your provinces. It won't kill you instantly, but it will start to wear you down. And this is simply because people are dying before they can adequately reproduce. It's a problem. It will also slightly, and this is scaled by growth and death scales. It will also slightly increase unrest, the same way as foul air. So just casually includes the entire foul air unrest event here. So while your taxpayers are dying, they're also becoming unrestful because, they're aging prematurely and they want you to stop that. So they pay fewer taxes. And then aging for units greatly increased. If you have units that are short-lived, this is brutal. If you have humans, it's moderately brutal. If you have elves, you won't notice. Abyssians are vulnerable to this. Early age relays, land, recruit mages are vulnerable to this. Anything that starts old age naturally is vulnerable to this, whereas undead are not vulnerable to this, which is why Ermor can put it up and cackle evilly. It's a hated spell. It'll cause everyone to attack you, but it starts to screw the world in a serious way. Theft of the Sun, I think, is even worse, because whereas you can bear Burden of Time for a little while, Theft of the Sun ruins your ability to counter in battle, whereas Burden of Time doesn't actually impact your combat effectiveness that much. So Theft of the Sun, the Jabolbans, and only the Jabolbans, and only in the early age when it's still the Zots, can imprison the sun in their caverns. And it's a serious frickin' spell if they can get it off. It's a gem gen, 15 fire and 5 astral. It inflicts darkness worldwide in all battles, and that is significant because Jabolbans have night vision and most enemies don't. And instantly, that's a massive slice right off the combat effectiveness of your armies. Income minus 30% to all provinces, resource minus 30% to all provinces. It's a huge economic nerf, straight off the top. But it doesn't affect caves and deep seas. And caves are where the Jabolbans will live, and the deep sea is where Relay and stuff will live. This hurts. This hurts. This starts to really screw the ability of people to fight them, while also diminishing people's ability to fight them in the field through the darkness, while also empowering their economy with the gem gen effect. It's a good spell. I'd be worried about it if it was up, because it's minimizing my ability to fight Jabolba as well as screwing with my income, and I love my income. Then there's the two ones that, if they stay up, probably break the game for everyone that is actually vulnerable to these spells. Underdark, if you're not undead and gem dependent. Astral Corruption if you are not a Blood Nation. Underdark. Underdark is the Mundeha's dream, okay? Underdark is the entire world is covered in a blanket of the thickest night and no light touches the ground to the extent that you have to use artificial light sources, and even then you can only see a few feet in front of your face because the very essence of the world seems to suck the night up. It is like having Mundeha on every battlefield. It's brutal. Let's go through the effects. Worldwide income and resources minus 90%. Notice that your upkeep doesn't get commensurately reduced, but you can't grow crops in the darkness. You can't farm in the darkness. You can't manufacture in the darkness. Not easily. It's the reason people sleep at night. This breaks the gold economy and resource economy. At this stage, all you have left are gems. If you still have gold upkeep units, then they'll quickly drain your bank and start deserting it as upkeep runs well ahead of your income. It'd be very rare to see a late game nation, living nation, that doesn't have upkeep running at about 2/3 of income at the very least, and very little savings. So 1 or 2 turns of Underdark will bankrupt them and leave them with deserting units every turn and no ability to recruit new ones. Caves and deep sea are exempt. There's not many caves and deep seas. All battles are fought under darkness minus 6. So for context, a 10/10 human being fighting a skeleton under this, while this spell is up, will mean the human is fighting at 4/4 against the skeletons like 9/7 or whatever it happens to be. Skeletons are better troops than humans. Skeletons are better troops than some elves under Underdark. And it's not just skeletons, it's demons, it's devils, it's high tier thuggish undead, it's wights, it's banes. This is bad. This is bad for everybody in a big way. So how do you survive under Underdark? You take it down, because it took 100 death gems just to get there. So check what the overcast is. You either take it down, or you have to be entirely gem dependent in your economy and capable of putting out units that can fight under the Underdark effect. You need to change the way you fight, or this will ruin everything. It also means you can no longer afford infrastructure. There'll be no new temples, no new labs. You're basically frozen with what you've got because you will not have gold past your upkeep, unless you're in a 0 upkeep nation to begin with. Astral Corruption is bad and in a different way. Astral Corruption is much hated because it's almost impossible to take down because it's a blood spell, right? So people can scale their blood income far, far higher than gem income because you can just add more hunters as long as you have territory and patrollers. Now, a blood slave overcast only counts for half a pearl, but if you throw a 300 or 400 slave overcast, which is entirely possible at Astral Corruption, then knocking it down is almost impossible, and usually will only take a late game Blood Nation a few turns to hunt up the slaves to try again, albeit at a lower level. What does it do? It means that every turn, if you are... it basically corrupts the entire astral sphere of magic, so that if anyone casts a non-blood magic ritual or forges a magic item, there is a chance that a horror, ranging from a lesser horror to a doom horror, will attack and kill the mage responsible. It forces enemies to stop casting, lest they risk their mages, or it requires them to do shit like giving rings of returning and full thug gear to people who are casting large rituals or forging items, so that when they get attacked by a horror, they survive and move out with only more horror marks to compensate. It's brutal. It's brutal, and it's almost impossible to take down. If Astral Corruption goes up, and you are a Blood Nation and your enemy is not, then you will win the war of attrition as long as you can hold them for a couple of turns, because you will maintain your ability to cast and summon and forge, and they will not. So I hate Astral Corruption and Underdark, but you're meant to. They represent the zenith of magic being used as a weapon of mass destruction in a ritual sense, with the exception of one other spell that's worse, which is Wish for Armageddon, which just kills 25% of the world every time it's done. These represent really foul magics that are used to corrupt and destroy the earth for the purpose of enabling a victory for one power to rule over the ashes. I think that as much as I love winning, I would find it hard to cast these in a game, because it's hard to reach a point where you're like, yeah, the ends justify the means, and therefore I should destroy all agriculture on the planet, or I should ruin the ability for magic to ever be used safely again and force people to rely on sacrificing virginal humans in order to power their spells. These are really dark spells, but if you're prepared to declare war on the world, and make no mistake, these spells are declarations of war on the world, because you can always take down Astral Corruption or Underdark by killing the mage responsible. Any global can be brought down by killing the mage responsible. So, you're inviting people to throw everything they have at you before these spells sap their strength. The strength of these spells here is that they can turn a game. They can allow you to fend off 2-3 opponents at a time if you are immune to their effects. If you are Jabolbra and you cast Theft of the Sun, if you are Middle-Aged Ermor and you cast Underdark, if you are Utgard and you have, for example, Illwinter, your situation is far, far, far better than it would be otherwise, except for the fact that other people are probably going to try and come for you. If you can keep it up, particularly at this end of the scale, if you can keep that up, then you're golden. I won't talk much more about strategy in this video. I'll save that for next video, where we talk about the strategy of when you use globals and how you employ them. But this video, I just wanted to talk through them. Give serious consideration to what globals might be available to you, which ones you might want to aim for, and in particular, presaging the next video, what the diplomatic consequences of casting any given global might be. With that said, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.